Apprenons l'anglais en contexte. You don't have to answer this question if you're bound by professional secrecy. To be bound by professional secrecy. Être tenu par le secret professionnel.
Yeah.
From your experience as a therapist, what is the most commonly faced issue by expats, especially here in Madrid?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is important to address in the sense, as we were mentioning before, the taboo or the understanding of going to therapy as if you have to be really chronically depressed or undergoing
Subir.
Undergoing something really severe. But in fact, expats benefit from going to therapy.
Donc la préposition qui suit le verbe benefits est from ou by. Attention aux faux amis, ce mot ne sera pas la traduction du bénéfice en business English. On dira dans ce cas profits. Et l'adjectif rentable sera profitable in English.
Benefit from going to therapy simply because of the situation they're in. As we said, the lack of social support, like your family, friendships, a partner, or in another country. Culture clash, as in translated as in all my social cues.
Social cues, ce sont les repères sociaux.
All my social cues, all the social norms that I've used all my life are suddenly taken away.
To take away, dans ce contexte, c'est s'évaporer, disparaître ou retirer.
And I'm having to start from scratch.
Start from scratch, repartir de zéro.
And as humans, we all want to belong.
En tant qu'être humain, nous voulons tous appartenir à un groupe.
As humans, we all want to belong. All right, no one wants to feel like they don't fit in. And suddenly we're starting from scratch with that kind of teenager feeling again of I need to make friendships, I need to make connections, I feel left out. So there's that in the background. And then also, it's a brilliant opportunity when, if you remove all the social influence of, say...
Pour dire disons en anglais, vous pouvez dire let's say, ou tout simplement say, comme elle le fait ici, et vous mentionnez les choses.
If you remove all the social influence of, say, society, family, culture, and so on, just questioning, like, what life do I want to have? Like, what's imposed by culture and what really is it that I want to do with my life?
Mm-hmm.
And that can be terrifying to suddenly ask yourself and have that kind of self-reflection moment.
Self-reflection, réflexion personnelle.
Have that kind of self-reflection moment of what life do I want to be living? But it's in fact what many expats go through when living abroad. Like sometimes they take it as a gap year.
Et gap year, c'est ce qu'on appellera une année sabbatique ou tout simplement un an de congé. Par exemple, le temps de repos que certaines personnes se donnent entre la licence et le master.
Like sometimes they take it as a gap year. Like, maybe I'll just be a teacher assistant, all right, just for the experience. There's that identity crisis of this is not what I studied, I'm not even prepared for this, I feel a bit out of depth.
Je me sens dépassé.
I feel a bit out of depth. But then figuring out what is it that I want to do. It might not even be what I studied back at home. But when taking away all the influence of society, friendships and so on, what is it that's most meaningful for me?
Meaningful, significatif.
What is it that's most meaningful for me? What makes me feel more myself? So going back to your question then, for expats, I feel therapy can really help with that kind of, deep reflection of, like what life direction do I want to take? What do I want to make out of my life? What's important to me? What's getting in the way? Because sometimes it can be like the judgment from my family, feeling like I've made a reckless decision.
Reckless decision, une décision irréfléchie.
Feeling like I've made a reckless decision, leaving and coming to live here. And being able to ask yourself, like, am I going to live the life that they'd want for me based on their choices? What would my life look like if I did that? Versus if I were able to make room to the fact that maybe I'm going to disappoint them in that sense, but make the choices based on what really matters to me. What would my life look like? Is that fulfilling to me?
Est-ce que cela m'épanouit?
And navigate those difficult feelings and thoughts that show up.
Mm-hmm. I guess mental preparation is needed before setting off. To set off, c'est partir, se lancer. Before setting off. There is this myth of constant enjoyment.
For sure. Generally, as a society, we all have like that happiness myth. Like, I mean, if you understand it from a biological perspective, we do naturally want to escape from physical pain.
Mm-hmm.
Similar things happen with emotional pain. Like, anything that makes us feel uncomfortable, we naturally want to avoid it. So that's in the background there as a society. Like, if something makes you feel uncomfortable, just escape. But then at the same time, there's this romanticized and glamorized idea of living abroad.
Cette idée romantique et glamour de la vie à l'étranger.
There's this romanticized and glamorized idea of living abroad, now with TV shows that specifically address that too. But the idea of, you go abroad, it's the time of your life. People even share, when they talk about their experiences, they naturally talk about the highlights.
Highlights, les faits marquants.
They naturally talk about the highlights. They're not talking about those difficult moments they've had. So there's that pressure and expectation that it's going to be amazing all the time. And that's literally not possible, for anyone. We can't be happy all the time. And that expectation
Cette attente
leads to people to feel like if I'm not enjoying every second, I've failed or there's something wrong with me for not making the most of this experience.
To make the most of something, tirer le meilleur parti.
Making the most of this experience. And it's kind of this vicious cycle.
Ce cercle vicieux.
And it's kind of this vicious cycle where then I feel like I should be doing more. I'm obviously more critical to myself. Versus being able to embrace it's normal to have low points.
Être capable d'accepter qu'il est normal d'avoir des moments difficiles.
Versus being able to embrace it's normal to have low points. And in fact, they're very useful too. Because being able to have that, what we were talking about before, that moment to self-reflect and think, why am I feeling like this? Why am I feeling sad? Does this mean that fitting in is important to me? Or that I'm not doing the things that really did matter in my life? Sometimes, people start realizing maybe before I played more instruments or did more exercise, and here because of how my life is set out.
Comment ma vie est organisée.
And here because of how my life is set out, I don't have time for that and I'm missing that. And that was a really important part of me too. Well, that sadness that kicks in then.
La tristesse qui s'installe alors.
Well, that sadness that kicks in then is useful to kind of include that in your life and your routine here too. If you're all the time trying to numb that out.
Engourdir cela.
If you're all the time trying to numb that out and escape from that feeling, you're going to continue living your life without doing the things that do matter to you and do add value in your life.
As a psychologist, I guess you spend most of your time when trying to solve people's problems, listening to them and trying to understand them mentally, right?
Yeah.
And then you develop some skills there, and you're probably pretty good at analyzing people's behavior and understanding who they are, their identity and everything.
Yeah.
Does it somehow result in... To result in, entraîner, amener à. Does it somehow result in you being very judgmental? To be judgmental, porter un jugement. La question posée est de savoir si son expérience de thérapeute, lui conférant la capacité de déchiffrer la personnalité et l'identité des gens, l'amène à porter des jugements sur les personnes qui l'entourent. Does it somehow result in you being very judgmental in real life situations when you look at people around?
Well, ideally the opposite. What a therapist has to do is not be judgmental. You've got to be able to separate your own, upbringing.
En rappel, upbringing, c'est l'éducation.
You've got to be able to separate your own, upbringing, values, and again, acknowledge that just because you think in a certain way doesn't make that the absolute truth. And when you're working with someone, what you're actually doing is helping them live the life that's fulfilling to them.
La vie qui les comble.
Helping them live the life that's fulfilling to them. So it's never going to be the choices that you'd make necessarily, obviously.
Right.
So you're helping clarify for them, what's important to you, what would be meaningful to you. And you're just more like someone that's helping clarify and separate, what are fears getting in the way.
Ce que les craintes entraînent.
What's the insecurity getting in the way. But never giving the answers or telling them what to choose, because it's not going to be their answer necessarily either. So then going back to your question, the same thing in ideally our personal life. We should be able to also separate, not judge others, and be able to hopefully be compassionate is the whole idea as a therapist, to understand what we see on the outside, you never know what that person's going through. So we wouldn't be skipping or jumping to conclusions.
Tirer des conclusions hâtives.
We wouldn't be skipping or jumping to conclusions saying, clearly if they're doing this means that about them. Because our experience tells us there's so much more than what we can see. In fact, our way of working is what we call CBT and third generation approach. So that includes acceptance and commitment therapy.
La thérapie d'acceptation et d'engagement.
Acceptance and commitment therapy. Mindfulness.
Mindfulness, la pleine conscience.
Mindfulness. And And our way of working is understanding like a person is far much more than their symptoms. Like what we see on the outside is just, a function. Why they're behaving a certain way is what we're trying to address. So in therapy, we're getting to the nitty-gritty.
Nous entrons dans le vif du sujet, dans le fond.
In therapy, we're getting to the nitty-gritty. We're trying to figure out, why are you behaving in this way? Is it to feel like you belong, like you fit in? Is it to escape from uncomfortable feelings? Is it to feel that sense of certainty and control, right? So I should hope that I wouldn't be, going back to your question, jumping to conclusions when meeting people in my personal life, assuming I know what they're going through.
Et voilà, pour plus de contenu, abonnez-vous et activez la cloche de notification. À présent, essayez de faire un bref résumé de la conversation dans les commentaires pour évaluer votre compréhension.